Alright, the Ek-ZekKil has been updated once again, and today we're going to put it through the ringer. When it was originally getting redesigned, the concept was that this sword was going to be properly powerful, and it was going to finally be a legendary weapon that you would really yearn to wield. It wouldn't just be some EOF fodder niche special attack anymore. So the redesign aims to finally make it the BONK sword. Is it another flop, or is this third time redesign finally the charm? Let's find out. To give you the briefest of recaps, the original Ez-ZekKil spec was a bleed that increased in power with any subsequent bleeds. The Ez-ZekKil redesign from last week gave the Ez-ZekKil a passive effect that buffed 3 of your melee abilities, Quake, Smash, and Pulverize, as well as gave the Ez-ZekKil a brand new special attack, which was really cool in concept I thought, but overall it really just didn't deliver in damage and it had way too high of an adrenaline cost. So today's adjustment keeps the same passive effect. Quake still applies for affinity, Pulverize still costs 60% adrenaline, and Smash still does heavily increased damage. That passive was great and is still great today. Today's update, however, focused on the special attack, and it heavily buffed that special attack, so let's take a look. So upon casting the special attack for the first time against an enemy, you are going to select that enemy to become known as your Flamebound Rival. Your Flamebound Rival is now going to deal 12% less damage to you, and you're going to deal 12% more damage to it. Already, that's a very sizable increase from the 5% that those numbers were last week. 12% is a really big increase, and to give you some perspective on how big a damage increase that is, it's really not that far off of the effects of a full book proc. But instead of that 10-second window of increased damage that you have while you're under a full book proc, you'll be benefiting from this 12% passive increase throughout the rest of your fight with your Flamebound Rival. So already that's a really great start to these changes. And on top of that, we now also have a lot more incentive to recast the Ez-ZekKil spec throughout the fight, whereas previously the damage was a complete disappointment. Last week it was effectively the same as using a tier 75 Armadyl Godsword spec that costed more adrenaline, a complete joke. However, today, let me introduce you to the BONK sword in all its glory. Every recast you do of the Ez-ZekKil is going to first and foremost refund you 15% adrenaline, effectively making this spec cost 35% adrenaline, which is very reasonable for a powerful special attack. It's now also going to do 4 separate hits, each of which does have the chance to critically strike, which would further refund you adrenaline if you were under the effects of a crit buff already. But ultimately, those 4 hits are going to add up to do about 800% ability damage now, versus the measly 440% it was at last week. This is a great change, and I believe that it's finally worthy of the BONK sword title. But don't just take my summary for it, let me show you it in action. I tried out Zamorak and the Arch-Glacor to show you some of the power of that damage reduction, as well as a damage increase that we get during a very lengthy and sustained boss fight. Afterwards, I'm also going to show you some quicker boss fights to show you that the BONK sword can really shine everywhere that you want to use melee. Zamorak. I think this special attack really shined here. You could use it right before the big adrenaline refund on the first pad, and then you would get a big benefit for the remainder of the fight. 12% less damage taken and 12% increased damage dealt. You could also use the subsequent specs of the Ez-ZekKil to deal huge damage before or even after any subsequent adrenaline refunds on any of the remaining pads, and you'd be able to get some really comfortable phases. I was very easily able to skip mechanics at 500%, and since 500% Enrage is very likely going to become a potential meta for both farming with some of the announced drop table changes, I think it might be time to consider dusting off the old melee gear and bringing it here to Zamorak. While I do think melee camping at Zamorak is pretty rare, anyone who enjoys melee camping is really going to enjoy using the Ek-ZekKil here. One other interesting thing to consider with the Ek-ZekKil at Zamorak is it seems like it might actually have a big place in the high level / the Grandmaster meta, where you may similarly cast the initial spec during the first pad before the big adrenaline refund, and then during the third pad where you're going to be using Berserk anyway, you will have a huge advantage, speeding up your phase quite a bit. The Arch-Glacor is the next boss I tested, and meleeing Glacor is again another unpopular way to kill the boss, since there are a lot of times where you're almost artificially taken out of the fight, whether that's to focus on the minions or to dodge the beams. However, since Glacor is such a lengthy boss fight with a lot of hit points and who also does big damage to your player, the damage reduction really shines here, and being able to cast the Ek-ZekKil spec multiple times to get those really big hit splats was awesome. I think this can really shine fine at Glacor, especially in the kind of mid-tier in rages, say anywhere from 500% to 2000% in rage. Araxxor was an interesting boss where I tested out the Ek-ZekKil. It's one where you're time gated in the first phase by about a minute, irregardless of what you do. So that works well with the Ek-ZekKil spec. You can cast the special attack right away on phase 1, and when it comes time for the melee top path special skip, your BONK sword is going to be fully charged up and ready to do those 4 massive hit splats to really help you out with that tricky skip. I was able to consistently skip the top path by solely using the Ez-ZekKil spec. I would do Chaos Roar, Ez-ZekKil spec, and the boss was phased, skipping the mechanic outright. Skipping the top path outright. I think this might come into play for anyone who's still needing that Master Speed Killer achievement. Solak is another interesting boss to consider using the Ek-ZekKil, and it's one that I would really like to test further in groups. But if that initial root skip is consistent with an Ek-ZekKil spec, then this is going to be a huge shift in the mage melee hybrid meta, or even the tribrid meta. So it's a bit TBD to be determined here, but if any high-level Solakers do want to experiment with me here, shoot me a message. This seems like an exciting place to test the Ez-ZekKil changes. Virago. The special attack clears with every phase transition, so unfortunately this completely sucks here. If the effect persisted between phases, this would be a very cool shift, particularly in the hard mode meta, where you're unable to use Berserk for every phase, but you may still want to use melee for almost every phase. So unfortunately, because that initial spec is going to clear with every phase, it's going to get a 0 out of 10 here. Raksha. Raksha was a great example of a relatively short boss fight where the BONK sword really shines. Being able to cast it in phase 1 and then build back up to a strong Berserk and easily get the pool skip using the next Ez-ZekKil spec felt incredibly smooth. It's the perfect showcase for how effective this sword is in a melee focused fight that lasts over a minute. Expect it to become your new best friend in any of those scenarios. So some final thoughts and considerations when using this sword. The smash ability now becomes your best melee basic, and you're going to want to use this at every possible opportunity. Next up, the length swords are likely going to be taking a back seat for most melee situations right now. Ironically, we may have actually come full circle to the point that it's time to consider putting your length sword in your EOF in place of the Ez-ZekKil EOF. Don't worry, that's just a joke actually. But my early thoughts right now are that the Lengs will still be good for some short burst hybrid scenarios. For example, during AOD pillars, where you won't really have enough time or adrenaline to benefit from the Flamebound Rival effect. But the Ek-ZekKil is really going to shine in all melee camp scenarios, as well as any extended melee hybrid scenarios. So picture things like high enrage Zamorak, Solak, maybe Araxxor, and more that we'll test soon. The next consideration is that the Berserker's Necklace may become a worthwhile switch that does synergize with the Ek-ZekKil, increasing its damage. One other consideration is that the increased power of the Ek-ZekKil is going to incentivize stall-scape more. Unfortunately, this is something that I don't really like personally, but it's unarguable that this is going to incentivize you to stall some of your dual wield abilities like Decimate or Barge Destroy, and instead of releasing those with dual wield as you normally would, you would want to release those with the Ek-ZekKil to take advantage of the increased damage. I think that might be a contentious shift in the meta for a lot of players, as melee is already a style that has heavily incentivized stalling to take full advantage in the past. Lastly, the Ek-ZekKil is powerful enough that it may be a legitimate consideration for a lot of players to buy a second Ek-ZekKil to simply use for the flanking ability. Previously, you would use an offhand length sword or really any offhand, but with these buffs and the synergy from the Flamebound Rival plus the Berserker's Necklace, flanking with an Ez-ZekKil is very likely going to be in the melee meta. So those are two potentially contentious changes. Overall though, I'm really happy with these changes personally. While I actually did enjoy the bleed spec from the old Ez-ZekKil and I thought it was pretty unique, I think that this is some proper melee power creep and it finally makes the Ez-ZekKil worthy of the BONK sword title. So I'm pretty excited to get to play with this more and maybe get to show you some advanced rotations as we learn the best ways to really maximize this sword. But my day one impressions, fantastic update. So that's it for this video. Let me know what you thought of the Ez-ZekKil changes. Are you going to pick up melee full time now? I think you would have a really fun time if you did. But anyway, if you want to stay up to date with RuneScape news, high level PVM metas, and so much more, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching and see you next time.